Yeah, great to be here. So my name is Levi Wolf. I'm a senior lecturer at the University of Bristol.
And I'm Daniel Arribas-Bel, also senior lecturer at the Geographic Data Science lab in the University of Liverpool.
Today, we'll be giving a short talk about some of the concepts and ideas that we're going to present in our book titled Geographic Data Science. And then we'll close the second half of the talk with a little bit of computation where you can walk through some examples yourself doing some examples of spatial data science. So without much further ado, I'd like to get started by sharing my screen and then showing slides. So today, we'll be talking about enriching your analytics with geographic data science. And as I said before, the talk will be split into two parts. The first part will be on the concepts that Danny and I will be showing you how to compute later on in the call. So starting off with some of the concepts in geographic data science, it usually helps to sort of get a good idea about what geography really is. So I'd like to start with this one idea. A colleague of mine at Bristol, former colleague Ron Johnston, used to have this sort of division between geography, which was this sort of academic discipline, and geographers. And something that he would say occasionally was that not everybody does geography, but that everybody can be a geographer. And I think that that's really true for data scientists as well. Not everybody, has to do geography, but everybody can be a geographer, and geography can work for nearly any problem. So academically, we talk about geography as what geographers do, which doesn't really give you a good idea of, practically speaking, how geography adds value to the things that you do on a day-to-day basis. Practically speaking, geography is the systematic study of relationships between people and their environments. And we use sort of the geographical concepts and techniques to study a whole bunch of different ideas in social and environmental sciences. So each of these concepts or problems or topics are places where geographers have done significant amounts of work to advance the state of knowledge. But in contrast to this kind of academic definition of what geography is, geographers use the relationships between people and their environments to solve problems. So in this sense, all you have to do to be a geographer is use those relationships, use that information that gives you in order to solve problems or predict better or manage better. So like I was talking before, not everybody does geography. It's not always going to be the case that you want to get something spatial out of your analysis, and we accept that. Many data scientists on a day-to-day basis aren't really needing sort of intrinsically geographic constructs. Nobody, not many people necessarily need an explicitly spatial model, and maps are only one kind of visualization that many data scientists have to make on a day-to-day basis. However, for anything that you do, we think that geography can help you do it better. So this talk is going to be about how the specifics of geographic computation and geographic data can help you get there. So starting off, I'd like to talk a little bit about what's cool about geographic data before we actually get to the computation. And I'm not sure if people have seen this kind of New York Times One Nation Tract series of articles. But it talks a little bit about how cell phone positioning data is becoming so ubiquitous and so present in the world that it has some sort of serious social and political consequences. And specifically, the New York Times focuses on two quotes that I'd like to use to structure the rest of our discussion. First off, they note that every minute of every day, everywhere on the planet, there are dozens of companies logging the movements of tens of millions of people. Later on in the article, they note that without much effort, we, the journalism team at the New York Times, spotted visitors to the estates of Johnny Depp, Tiger Woods, and Arnold Schwarzenegger, connecting the device's owners to their residences. So these two properties are kind of key points in the argument that the New York Times is making about how this kind of information is special. And it actually helps us understand a little bit about the theory of why geographic data is special. Specifically, these two quotes are examples of the two core benefits to geographical information. Geography is ubiquitous. Everything occurs at a geographical location as well as a time or a duration, right? So there's something about geography that can be measured for nearly anything in the world. Any data stream that your company works with, or any kind of data stream that's generated by devices in urban analytics or in space or in telecommunications, anything will have a time and generally a place. Now, maybe that isn't collected all the time. Maybe it should be. It's increasingly the case that it is collected. Geographic information is ubiquitous. In addition, geography helps us enhance information that's already available. It gives us the context of an individual observation. So without much effort, they could link individual observations to other observations. They knew that people visited this particular residence, and they could infer that these two people knew each other. So geographical information provides context. It allows us to enhance information that's already available. And we'll be using this context today in a process called spatial feature engineering, which I'll explain later. Focusing on this idea here, that everything has a geographical location and time of occurrence, I'd like to explain a little bit more about how we use relations to establish better data. So focusing on time, because that's a little bit easier for people to reason about, I might have a story like this. Every Monday, without fail, a final year undergrad at the University of Bristol knocks on my door right at 5:55 p.m., right as I'm packing up to leave the office. And they ask me if they can meet to talk about their dissertation. Because in the UK system, you know, undergrads write these very long, important final documents. In order for them to graduate, they have to be pretty good. So it's a really stressful process. And I'm usually trying to be available to students when they have these questions. So every year, it seems like this happens, especially in the spring. This little bit of information can be abstracted into some event E that happens at a particular time. So this is just an occurrence. This is a location in time. But it also gives us information about something like periodicity. It happens at a particular frequency. It happens at a rate. There is, you know, a structure to the way that these events continue to happen. And further, time also gives us information about causality. You know, as I pack up to leave. Now, it might just be spurious causality or some weaker sense of causality than what we might be thinking, because I don't think the fact that I'm putting things into my backpack causes students to show up. But that kind of relationship between when things happen and when other things happen is a critical part of any kind of time series analytics. Knowing the sequence of things is important. So I think in a general sense, everybody is aware that time is way more than a clock position. There's so much more information than a timestamp. You get relations, you get all of the other kind of before and after, contemporaneous, all of these relations in time. Space is also more than an Earth position. So when I get a visitor to my office, you know, that happens at a particular location. But then I also might, you know, that event has a relation to other events that are occurring. Are they near? Are they far? Are they only in my office? Are other offices also having visitors? And further, does one student going to my office then cause other students around them to rush to the office to get there as well before, you know, my vital time is taken up advising students? So all of these bits of information show that space is also more than an Earth position. Geography is much more than location. It's also about relation and contagion. which are sort of geographical analogs to our temporal cousins of causality and periodicity. So there are two forthcoming books that I'd like to just show briefly that discuss these concepts really in detail. And they're both in the CRC Press series for, I think it's computational statistics and geography, or computation in geography. The first one is written by our friends Enrique, Vuoko, and David, and is on Python for geographic data analysis. You can see the book at pythongis.org while they're writing it. Today, though, I'd like to talk about a concept from the book that we're writing together with Serge Ray, and then Danny, my co-speaker here today, on geographic data science. You can find the book at geographicdata.science/book. The book is due out in 2022, and it covers a wide variety of topics in geographic data science. We have a sort of division in the concepts of geographic data science. In the book, we talk a little bit about this concept of commodity data science, where you might need to do an analysis that your company already knows how to do, but then you need to visualize that information in some geographical way to help make decisions. We call that commodity data science because you're just sort of taking these existing tools and integrating them into your workflow. But there are other levels of geographical data science as well. You could use geographical thinking to enrich the analyses that you're already doing and make them better, such as improving your prediction accuracy or validity. You could also use explicitly geographical techniques to build better predictions and learn better from your data. The book that we're writing really focuses mainly on enrichment and extension in geographical data science. Today, I'll primarily be talking about enriching your analyses using spatial feature engineering. And Danny, after me, will provide you with some code and a walkthrough to do this yourself. So when we're thinking about how to enrich our standard analyses with geographic data science, the simplest and most straightforward way to do that is to use spatial feature engineering. In machine learning, feature engineering is the process of developing new information that you can use to train your models. Well, spatial feature engineering is using information about spatial relationships to add data to your problem. So this is, if you have positional or relational geographic data, you can get information for free. It gives you something to your analysis. And like I said before, it's much more than just location. It's also about relation and contagion. So we divide this into two ideas. You can connect data sets together using map matching, or you can express the latent structure in your data using map synthesis. Map matching is kind of like using geography as a linkage key between data sets, whereas map synthesis is kind of like using the geography inside of your data to build better variables. As an example, imagine you're modeling house prices for some prop tech firm. If I want to predict the price of a house, I'll need to know a little bit about the house. How big is it? Does it have a garden? How many bedrooms? How many bathrooms? When was the structure built? Etc. All of those things that a prop tech firm might need to make predictions about the sales price of houses in a given area. But information that's also relevant, for example, includes how good the schools are around the house. Another relevant bit of information is how far is the house from a nearest park. That's an incredible determinant, usually for people living in urban spaces, for access to green space and interest in being outdoors. And that can put a significant price premium on a property. One harder to quantify area that's at the cutting edge of machine learning and prop tech is the architecture in the area pretty? Does it look nice to a random observer? Does it look like a place that people want to stay or people want to be? Similarly, you could use sort of elevation-based information or view shed analysis to figure out, are there good views from the property? Can you see the ocean? Can you see, a mountain? Is there a nice view? Air quality is also increasingly an important part of understanding property value, especially as it becomes more well associated with ideas about children's development and your health. So all of these questions about the house are about the relationship of the individual observation to things around it. If we build new information into our problem using this data and linking information about the house to information about schools in the area or the nearest park or the architecture in the area, this would be the example of map matching. This is because we're using spatial relationships to transfer information from the target data or information about ancillary data, schools, parks, architecture. We're using the geography of that to transfer to the target data about the house and the price. Okay? Alternatively, we might use a different collection of engineered features. It might be useful to know how much are nearby houses. Does this tend to be a more expensive area on average or a less expensive area on average? We might not be able to quantify, how pretty an area is, but this might be a good proxy for that information. And we get that from the data we have on hand for free if we know the location of the house. Further, we could be more sophisticated and try and find out, okay, if I know that this house has 10 bedrooms, maybe someone living way out in the nice countryside, what's the average number of bedrooms in a nearby house? Is this a much larger house than things that are nearby, or is it a much smaller house than things that are nearby? That information too can help with prediction. Also, it can be helpful to know whether or not nearby things are similar. Does any nearby house have some amenity that this house has, like a garden? So this kind of internal structural relationships between our observations through geography, we can use that to build new features as well. And that process is known as map synthesis. We're using the fact that two observations are nearby, the geographical or spatial relationship between observations, we're using that to synthesize new features for our analysis. So again, for you to kind of get experienced in doing these kinds of things, this book, Python GIS, is more about the actual geographical computation and data modeling that you'll need to wrangle all these disparate data sets, get them in the right format, and then do analysis. Our book, Geographic Data Science, is all about the actual statistical and analytical methods that you can use right now to improve your analysis with geographic data science. So at this point, we'll move to sort of working through the computation and code examples. We've left quite a bit of time to make sure that there's time to build the various computation environments and everybody can get on the same page. And today we'll be walking you through the chapter in the book called Spatial Feature Engineering, which is the implementation in code of the concepts I've just talked about in map matching and map synthesis. If you view the link at the bottom of the screen, you can use that to access the Spatial Feature Engineering chapter. In a moment, I'll let Danny show you how then to run the notebook in the cloud so that you don't have to set up any kind of local Python installation. Alternatively, you can go to the website and run the chunks of code yourself. So with that, I will exit screen sharing. And let's see, is there any questions in the chat before we proceed?
Yeah, there's been a few, and I've been trying to answer them, but maybe if you want to take over the chat, I think the one by Angela is the only one that's left to answer. So thanks very much, Levi. That was a fantastic introduction. the ideas of geographic data science and a little bit of what we're trying to do with the book. So, hello everyone. As I said, I'm Dan Arribas-Bel, and I'm going to take over the second part of the of this session. So let me first of all share my screen. How do I here? Okay, so you should now be viewing my browser. And if you click on the bit.ly link that Levi shared on the chat, or if you go to geographic-data-science/book, that's the website for the book that we're writing. The link will take you to the spatial feature engineering, which is one of the latest and the last chapters that we've been writing. Just a couple of notes about the book. This is, as Levi said, we promised the publisher it would be out, or we would get it ready for 2022, and it was before the world changed. So we're actually against the odds, still within target. So we should be, you should be able to get the paper copy of that by then. But what you can do already right now is see how the book is being written as it's being written. So we've taken a fully open approach, and the website contains what it is. So you get, I mean, we don't have any sort of hidden version that's being ready to be launched once it's published or anything. Whatever you're seeing is what we're doing as we go. So a couple of, one housekeeping thing. In a moment, I'm going to switch over to Jupyter Lab, which is a Python environment that allows you to run code. And if you want to do that too, here is what I recommend. Bring your mouse, hover your mouse over the rocket in the chapter, and then there should be two labels. Please click on the, you can do, click or open in a new tab on Binder. We don't have a Colab set up yet because Colab is a bit trickier to install, but Binder should launch a window that would look a little bit like this, with the chapter ready to go and ready to be run. And you will be able to run it just like I just did. So if you're interested in doing this, please click on the Binder link now, because it takes a couple of minutes to launch, or at least when I tested it this morning, it took a couple of minutes to launch the new tab. And in those 2 minutes, I'm going to give you an overview of what this chapter is about, and then we'll jump on getting our hands dirty with some code. So before I get started, let me also point you to the GitHub. So as I said, we're taking a radically open approach to writing this book. So everything that you're seeing on the website is backed on a GitHub repository that you can find on github.com/gdsbook/book. And that also means that if you have any suggestions, recommendations, or if you catch any typos, you can come over to the issues section, click on new issue, and let us know. And we would very much welcome any sort of engagement and feedback from the community. So once the PR is conveniently done, let's go back to feature engineering, or spatial feature engineering. Levi alluded to this in his intro talk. The idea, if you're coming to this talk from the data science world, from the world where you run machine learning models, a common term that exists in that literature is this idea of feature engineering, which is how we turn whatever data we're given into data that is ready to be fed into the algorithms that will do whatever we want them to do, whether it's a clustering algorithm or it's a predictive model or anything else that we're interested in. In the book, in this chapter, we're taking a geographic approach to this notion of feature engineering. Usually feature engineering has to do with calculating descriptive statistics from granular data that then we can plug in our models, or by extracting certain characteristics from, say, image data or sound data, denoising sound, and then calculating some averages from waves or whatever it is that you fancy people do in your day-to-day work. When we're talking about spatial feature engineering, what we're thinking about is how you can leverage geography and location to carry out those translations, those to carry out the creation of those features that you'll feed into your models or your analysis. And the way we structure this on the book, on the chapter, is through the two concepts that Levi mentioned. So I'm going to skip. I'll let you read at your own, at the pleasure of your own house, the introduction for the chapter and the rest. But we take an approach here, or we split this idea of spatial feature engineering into two main concepts. One is this idea of map matching, which you might have heard the term map matching. What we do here is conceptualizing it against the background of the rest of the book. And when we talk about map matching, what we really say is you're using geography as the ultimate linkage key between different data sets. Like Levi was saying in the intro, usually it is very rare that you have all of the data you want in a data set. Usually when you're doing an application or a real world analysis, whatever you want to do, the information comes from different data sets. And a lot of those data sets come at different scales, sometimes different temporal scales, definitely different file formats. And in almost any case, you have to do this process of linking. If you're lucky, you can get that linking directly through a column that already has, but more commonly than not, you're not going to have that luxury. The idea of map matching is using geography and location as the ultimate linkage key, as this idea that to the extent that every data set that you have can be pinpointed on a map, you can use that to put them together and to stack a map in ways that allow you to plug them into the analysis in a consolidated form. So map matching is a general term that that involves a wide range of applications, a wide range of techniques. Here, I'll show you in a second when we talk about code. I'm going to refresh this for a second so I don't lose it. I'll show you one that's very simple and one that's a little bit more advanced to give you a taste of what you can do with these techniques. So that's map matching. And the second one is what we call here map synthesis. The idea here is that you're using geography not to connect different data sets, you're using geography to augment a given data set. And by augmenting, what we mean is extracting more insight and extracting more information. And in this case, as it's related to the location and the spatial configuration of the observations or the samples that you have in your data set. So these are the two flavors that we give you. And based on these two, there's a host of techniques under each that allow you to, in the first one, in map matching, connect different data sets through location. And in the second one, augment the given data set through spatial relationships. So, okay, if you have any questions or any comments, drop them on the chat, and Levi is on fire answering them. And I'm going to move on to the practical part of the session. So, as I said, if you're on your browser, you can click on the binder link, and then once it builds, which it might be somewhere up to a couple of minutes, you will get a Jupyter Lab interface like this, which is all ready to go for you to play with code and with the chapter. And while Levi was giving the introduction, I've gone ahead and run the whole notebook, but you can if you want. Just a comment that because of the structure and the backend that we've used in the book, the content that you're seeing in the website here is exactly the same as the content that you're seeing in the notebook. In fact, the website is built and processed from the notebooks that we're using here. So you can go ahead and import everything we're going to use, and we'll get to those one at a time. And then let's go ahead also and read the data. So in this example, we're going to be using a data set of property locations, as Levi was demonstrating in the intro. We're using a set of Airbnb properties that are advertised for the city of San Diego in the southwest of the US. If you're interested in seeing where the data comes from, I'm going to flick back to the book. You can come to the dataset section, and the Airbnb will show you how we built this data set that we're using now. So we read it. We can go ahead and read it. And Airbnbs. And if you're familiar with Python and GeoPandas, this is a geodata frame that contains about 6,000 properties with location of them, but also with some characteristics. So let's move on to, I'm going to scroll down, let's move on to map matching here. Remember, the idea of map matching is using geography as the ultimate linkage key, so of connecting one data set with another one through their spatial relationships. So for this example, we're going to try to augment the data set of Airbnb properties, which actually I could have plotted, but we're going to connect the location of the properties, which actually I will plot just because I can. Airbnbs, hopefully. It's a bunch of points. We're going to connect that to a set of urban amenities. So by amenities, we mean things like coffee shops, bars, etc. Whoops. This is the risk of running live. So here you can see a few points that are sort of stepping onto each other, but this is all of our data set. If you want to, well, you should be able to recreate it. And where are we going to get the amenities? We get them through OpenStreetMap. And to interact with OpenStreetMap, we use a library developed by Jeff Boyne called OSMNX, which is a fantastic interface for Python to OpenStreetMap data. So we want to use points of interest or POIs. And for that, OSMNX has a function called POIs from Polygon. We've created here, I'm skipping sort of through to get to more content, but we've created the bounding box of the locations that we have for the Airbnb properties into this polygon. And we can pass the polygon and then the type of data that we want. And in this case, we just want to pull down restaurants and bars effectively within San Diego. And I'm not going to do it, but you saw how this last time I ran it a few minutes ago took just under 3 seconds. So here we can group them and we see that we have about 300 bars and about 1,000 restaurants. We can also pull out a bit of Matplotlib wizardry and create a map. And this is the two data sets that we have. In blue, we have every Airbnb property, and in red, we have every amenity. So the first example that we want to show you for map matching is how can we create a count of how many amenities every Airbnb has within a range of, within a distance threshold. And I think we picked 500-meter buffer, but you could change it. And the magic of having Binder back in this session is that you can change the threshold and it should run just as fine. So the first thing that we show in the book is that there's a misalignment between the, well, actually there isn't. So we're good to go with the projections. We project both so we can express it in meters and distances make sense. And then once we're ready, what we do is we create a buffer of 500 meters. This is a circle with a radius of 500 meters around every Airbnb. And then we will use this buffer down here with the spatial join from GeoPandas to connect and allow us to know, again, this is basically in this cell is where you're getting how geography plays a role, where we're being able to connect POIs or amenities and Airbnb properties by location. And the specific rule that we run here is how many well, we're connecting properties within the buffer of 500 meters, sorry. So once it's joined, we can create a count, and we create the count. This is actually, at this point, is not even spatial. This is vanilla pandas. So we're grouping by the ID of the property, and we're counting how many amenities. And here is an example where the first property has 12 amenities, the second 7, etc. And again, with a bit more of Matplotlib wizardry that you can see on the chapter, here is a map of every Airbnb property where we're giving a color based on how many amenities it has. So we started with 2 data sets that initially had nothing to do and through geography, we're able to connect them into a variable. And if you were, for example, running a model on the Airbnb properties, you could now use a variable that relates to amenities that you've extracted through the POI. So this is a twist. This sort of, we call it spatial feature engineering. It's almost a twist into traditional GIS. To give you an example that involves a bit more advanced modeling, I'm going to scroll all the way down to the bottom of this section of this chapter, where we're doing what we call aerial interpolation. The idea here is that you have two data sets, but the two data sets are lattice data. So they're polygons, they're two polygons layers, and they are two different layers. So what we have is a layer with H3 hexagons. We're still on the, hopefully I can, yes, on the San Diego data set. And actually, let me show you a quick labor of love that we're working also, which is contextually. Which will hopefully, and this is live, so it might fail, but hopefully won't, put a base map underneath the map and give you some context. And actually we can get a better sense. So this is the area of San Diego. We have the layer of H3 hexagons, and now it's becoming very common to use uniform geographies to connect different data sets that come at different geographies. So what we're going to do here is an example of how we can use a data set from the US Census in the form of census tracts, where we have population counts. So for every polygon, we know from the US Census how many people live there. And we're going to transfer this information from census tracts into the H3 geographies. To do that, we're using a package called Tobler. I've imported above, but just so you... Tobler, which you can actually check on pisal.org/Tobler. And we have a funky logo with Waldo there. And what this allows you is to model how many people would or should be apportioned to a smaller geography based on the counts that we have in this geometry in this geography. And in its simplest form, which is what we show you here with the area interpolate, all we're doing is basically giving the weight of the source geography based on the size of the area that is shared with the target geography. So if you can think of a H3 hexagon and imagine half of the hexagon goes into census tract A and the other half goes into census tract B, what we do is we get an average between the two census tracts based on the area. So we weight it by area and we create an estimate for every polygon, for every H3 hexagon based on the original one. Tobler also has more advanced models. You can get this as fancy as you want in terms of how you apportion these how you make this transfer from the original geography into the destination one. But just to give you a sense, and you'll see that this runs relatively quick, what we're saying is we specify the source data frame, the source geography, which in our case is the census tracts geographies up here, and then the target. So we say we want to transfer the information from these polygons to these H3 hexagons, and the variables that we want, we allow for what we call extensive and intensive. So extensive are counts and intensive are rates. So for extensive, this captures the population, this captures the density, and then all of the magic that I explained in terms of modeling how much of the original geography should go into the target and which with weights are worked out within the area interpolate. So if you want a bit more detail, and you can follow up on the chat, but there's a bit more. You can read a bit more on the chapter. So, and here is an example of what we end up trying to do. So we start with, say, population counts for the census tracts, and we have a target geography of hexagons. And after we combine these two, the source information with the target H3 hexagons, what we get is information from the census on the H3 geographies. And the same for the population density. We have 2 examples. So I'm going to have I know I'm rushing. I'm going to I'm going to rush for 5 minutes. This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to rush for 5 minutes, hopefully, to cover a little bit the bit on map synthesis, at least to give you a sense and a quick brush through the code that we use. And then if you have questions, I would really love to have 10 minutes at the end for questions from the public that we can answer live. And I think we lost Levi. Hopefully he's jumping back soon. Okay, so then the second part, remember, we've seen a couple of examples of map matching, how to connect different data sets through geography. Map synthesis is how to augment one data set through geography, through the spatial configuration of the samples that are within the data set. So for these, I'm going to Levi, did you miss what I was saying?
Only briefly.
Yeah, I was just saying that I'm going to rush really quickly through the map synthesis, hopefully to leave 10 minutes for folks to answer questions and for us to sort of answer them live.
Cool.
So excuse folks if I'm going to run. Hopefully you can go back to the chapter and this will give you the hook and the interest to go back and read through it on your own. But map synthesis is about expanding, and there's a few. Let me come back here to the chapter, and I'm going to toggle this off just because I can and because hopefully we'll let you read this a bit better. We have a couple of examples of map synthesis, what we call spatial summary features, which is calculating almost like descriptive statistics that summarize for every observation information or descriptives about all the other observations in the vicinity of each sample. And this, if you're familiar with spatial analysis, a lot of this is built on the idea of spatial weights matrices. So we have a lot of support for building these types of adjacency matrices or spatial weights matrices in PySal under the weights library. So we show you here a couple of examples on how you can build these, and then once you have built these weights matrices, these constructs, you can use them to create additional variables that tell you things about the data set and the spatial configuration of the observations within that data set. So we can create things like categorical spatial lags, like how many observations every observation has within a range of distance. For example, going back to Levi's illustration, how many Airbnbs every Airbnb has within 500 meters. So there's a couple of layers of spatial sort of thinking here. And I know if you've never sort of come into context with these, there's a lot of, there's a bit of depth, but excuse me for rushing through. There's more background on the chapter. So that's one. This is the example that I was talking about, distance buffers within a single table. There's another one, the ring buffer features, where we give you like different bands and you can be more specific through those. And then the final one is this idea of using point clustering or the identification of spatial clusters. So this is not clustering as in segmentation necessarily, although it could be. But in the spatial case or in the geographic case, using hotspot detection mechanisms to create what we would call categorical variables that then you can plug into your models as additional variables. And in this case, we show you an example on how to run a variation of the DB scan, the hierarchical DB scan. And here what we do is we create clusters or hot areas of hotspots where there's a lot of density of Airbnbs. And here's the illustration. And then once you identify those with your clustering algorithm, which in our case is HDB-scan, we show you that you can then use these to categorize the points and class them into part of a cluster or not, or part of which cluster or not part of a cluster. And then you can use those variables either to explore them. So as here, as you're looking whether there's any pattern by price. So are Airbnbs within a cluster more expensive or less expensive, or there's no pattern whatsoever, or just with the same approach, you could then use these constructs to plug them into a regression model or a predictive model or a clustering exercise, sort of a more advanced into the analysis machine learning approach. So I think this actually covers it. I know there's a lot of stuff, and apologies for rushing, but we thought it would be a better idea for a session like this to give you a sort of wide overview of everything that we've done in the chapter as a taster for everything we've done in the book, and hopefully whet your appetite. And if you're interested, you can go explore it on your own and go up more on your pace. Just a reminder, the book's coming out, hopefully, the world not imploding, which is a lot to hope these days, in 2022. But you can already check it out on the book website. And if you're interested, please reach out by writing an issue on the GDS book/book repository on GitHub. And with that, I think I'm going to shut up for a second and see if there's any questions, or if you want to say anything more specific, Levi. We also have time for that. I haven't been running on the chat, but yeah,
there have been plenty of questions. So am I? I shouldn't be.
No, you're good. You're good.
Cool. Yes. So yeah, there have been plenty of questions in the chat. One thing that's important to note is that the sort of integration of our book with other books that teach things like fundamentals of Python or kind of projections and geographical information systems in Python. Again, so as I said in the presentation with the slides, our book is mainly about the sort of analytical processes. It's not necessarily about GIS or projections or what we would describe as geocomputation. So for that, you might need a different resource, such as the Python GIS book by Enriching and his colleagues, or you might be better served with learn Python the hard way, or think Python for something that actually teaches the Python language. So yeah.
Yeah, and I'm going to pick up on that because there was an earlier question that I answered on the chat, but I think it makes a really good point that about how we see the book, like who is this book for, sort of picking up on where Levi was, but also how we envision the book to plug into a greater ecosystem. So first, when we started thinking about this book, we designed two personas, if you wish, this idea that product management people or product development people have to design product, like who is this for? So we came up with two big personas. One is data science folks who are used to doing Python in data science, and in their day-to-day work, they work a lot with data. They work with data science. Maybe they have experience with machine learning, but they don't have a lot of background on spatial data. So this book should plug right into the workflows that they use, because we connect with all of the libraries they should be familiar. We use pandas, we use GeoPandas, which is an extension of pandas. We use scikit-learn for all of the machine learning, etc. And then on top of that, we layer the geographic data science with PySal and NetworkX and a bunch of other libraries, OSMNX and so on. And then the other persona is folks who are more traditional GIS, who have a more traditional GIS profile and want to dip a little bit into this new data science world. So for those, a lot of the concepts that we talk should be familiar, But then this will give them, hopefully, the idea is a new sort of perspective that shows a little bit the where data science comes from. And hopefully it might, if we did our job, our job right, it should be a good introduction for them into moving into more data science, traditional data science techniques and ecosystem. And then sort of dipping into that, and this goes beyond the book, we're not also into the work that we do in PySal and so on. We're not trying to reinvent any wheels. What we're trying to do is contribute uniquely new functionality for geographic data science. And then everything that you could do better with other libraries, we show you how to integrate the work that we do in the book with all the other stuff that's already there. So this is not it doesn't exist in a parallel world for Python. It plugs into the PyData ecosystem pretty smoothly. So do we have any more? I think we have 5 minutes left.
Yep. The question about spatial databases. There are tools to do like read PostGIS, GeoPandas.
GeoPandas has functionality for reading of spatial databases.
So you use that sort of in a similar way to do how Pandas works with a database. You can use the read PostGIS functionality to send a query and get back the result into a Pandas data frame. So I would mostly recommend the read PostGIS function rather than stringing something together in different packages. If you just want the simple data frame off of a query, GeoPandas read PostGIS is where you should go. How scalable is it to spatial granularity and extent? And then someone asked about performance. PySal is extremely concerned with performance where we can get it. So as I said in the chat, most of our estimators work with sparse matrices as a default when you're encoding geographical relationships. And we are very oriented on performance using tools like Numba when we can get it. So you can also do some of the sort of more geographical querying and construction using things like scikit-learn and Dask if you really need extreme data sizes or need to compute a lot of different geographical relations.
Yeah, so we tried the model that we're trying to adopt, and it's a moving target, but it's to scale vertically, so to get faster code through things like Numba and NumPy and so on, and then to scale vertically, so to run things in parallel and distributedly through projects like Dask and so on. And this is very much an evolving and a work in progress, but we're working into a lot of functionality built into those foundations. Did you answer, Levi? There was another one I think that might be good to talk about raster. I think there was a question about whether you can use this.
But if you want to talk about that in more detail, go ahead.
Yeah. So one of the chapters the one chapter that's missing drafting, I'm going to go back, is this one, the one on spatial data, and we're preparing a structure that should walk you through a little bit of how we approach this idea of vector versus raster, and is much more unifying, I think, than the traditional GIS approach would give you. So stay tuned for that. But the short answer is yes, you can run a lot of the analysis that we have in PySal and related libraries on raster datasets. And in fact, this last summer, we just had a student working on a Google Summer of Code to build a bridge between a library called Xarray that allows you to read all sorts of rasters from climate models to geotiffs and satellite imagery into Python. And then we have now an interface, a layer that connects that to the data structures we use in Python. And as Levi was saying, that's highly optimized. So it should run pretty scalably. Okay, I think Levi, maybe it's your influence, but I'm never in time, and for once, I'm actually right on time. We even have 2 minutes to spare.
Indeed. So just before we run out of time, I'd like to remind everybody that questions and issues with the book can be filed at our website on github.com/gdsbook/book/issues. We're writing the book in public at Geographic Data Science, data.science/book. We'll have occasional blog posts that also detail our progress on the book, in addition to extensions to the material that we've posted with the book. The book will be sold by CRC Press and will be available in Dead Tree format in 2012.
No, 22.
Sorry, 2022. 2012 would be a hell of a late time. But thanks so much, folks.
Thank you, everyone.